Ladies and gentlemen, here are the top 12 best pack-a-punched weapons in Black Ops 6 Zombies. Yet, after another round of weapon patches and damage buffs and nerfs and even a visual recoil change, the Zombies meta has changed quite a lot after the release of Citadelle More, and we have a couple of new weapons that we want to talk about as well. So sit back, relax. I'm going to give you the best 12 weapons to use in this game, and I'm also going to show you how to get the maximum amount of damage out of all of these. There's a certain combination of augments and attachments you can use on your gun to just dish out an absurd amount of damage, so we're going to cover all of that today. Also, we are so close to 600,000, I can almost taste it. But in all seriousness, I'd just like to hit it before the end of the year. It'd be a wonderful Christmas present, but we'll see if we make it there. Either way, let's talk about the first thing that we need to do in order to set up the best pack-a-punched weapons in Black Ops 6 Zombies, and that is augments, ladies and gentlemen. Now, there's only two really specific augments that we need to talk about in order to make sure you're maximizing your damage output, and if we're looking at Deadshot, the one you're going to be using all the time is Deadhead, and there is also Dead First, which in a couple of really unique niche scenarios, this might be the better option, but for most people in general gameplay, and especially against boss fights and special enemies, this is not going to be worth it because you're almost never able to actually deal a critical shot to something at full health already. You know, with like a Mangler, you're going to be hitting its armor, and that negates that damage, so not really something you want to invest in. It's always going to be Deadhead here, and then I also like this augment for breaking armor. This is best for general gameplay and will help you get the maximum amount of damage out of these weapons. The second one we need to look at is Elemental Pop, and I personally like having Electric Cherry on for my major one, but the important one here is the Minor Augment Vulnerability. This is going to increase the elemental damage that you're going to put out, and it says slightly, but it's a pretty big jump, especially when combined with the Deadshot augments that we discussed prior. So these in combination are going to allow you to deal the most amount of damage that you physically can, and so with that in mind, let's get into these best weapons. Coming in at number 12 is the XM4. Now, this weapon boasts some of the best damage numbers in the game, and it's appeared on pretty much all of my lists before, but with all of the recent nerfs and buffs to other weapons and an update to visual recoil, I think the XM4 definitely deserves to be on this list, but I am going to put it over here at the bottom. Now, I went through a phase where I was trying to decide if maybe tac stancing a weapon and using a laser sight, you know, and kind of being a little bit more mobile was a better play, but it seems like with how rewarding headshots are here, tac laser isn't really the best option, and you want to be extraordinarily accurate, and so to do that, I went with Extended Mag 3 and also a red dot. So I think having an optic on this is one of the most important things. Obviously, combining it with the CHF barrel and rapid fire, combined with these augments, you're going to be absolutely unloading damage. Very consistent weapon, great at range, and I think is one of the best overall weapons. Coming up at number 11 is the Tonto, and my build has not changed on this at all. I've not actually been able to come up with a more optimized build for this weapon. It did get a little bit of a buff recently, and the update to visual recoil wasn't insane for this. That actually seemed to have a lot more of an effect on high recoil weapons, which we will talk about later, and the Tonto used to be a top 5 for me, but I had to drop it a little bit lower just because I do think there are a lot better options now if you're just looking for raw damage and effectiveness. However, it is still capable of doing just about everything. I've done the Citadelle More Easter egg and soloed that boss fight with only a Tonto, and it's perfectly capable of doing so. Obviously, the slower fire rate means better critical damage when you are hitting those points, so if you trust yourself to be accurate, this can be one of the better weapons, and it's also extremely mobile, it's easy to use, and I think having an optic on it is the best play because the iron sights aren't too pretty and you might be hitting the body a little bit more, and it doesn't do great against armor or body shots. That's one of the only downsides, but either way, a very fantastic weapon and deserves to be on the list. Coming in at number 10 is the LW3A1 Frostline sniper rifle. Pretty much all of the sniper rifles are great, and we're going to talk about a special one a little bit later in the video, but the Frostline has some of the best theoretical DPS in the game, but obviously there are a lot of factors when it comes to determining DPS and how functional a weapon is. There's a practical DPS as well. The problem with the Frostline is that it is not a weapon you can only use on its own and succeed at everything because it doesn't deal the most amount of damage to armor. In fact, it negates most of that. If you're hitting raw critical points such as like unprotected headshots or critical, you know, points on the Guardian inside the Citadelle More boss fight, anything that's an actual critical point that's not covered by armor, you're going to be getting big numbers out of all the time, and especially with these two augments attached to it, then you're going to be literally deleting things. You're going to shred them. However, the gameplay kind of speaks for itself. If you hit a critical, you can see how big of a health bar it chunks away, but if you don't hit a critical point, it's almost like having an AR or an SMG or just some other weak powered gun. It can feel horrible if you're not hitting these points, so it's a very high skill weapon to use, and sometimes the reward is not worth it. Another thing you have to to consider is I like using weapons with Frenzied Guard, and anything that needs to be rechambered or rebolted in between shots does not take advantage of Frenzied Guard in the way that it could, and the Frostline unfortunately does not meld well with that field upgrade. So it is held back a little bit. However, it does have some of the best theoretical damage numbers in the game. So if you feel like you can trust yourself to hit critical points, then it might be worth using, but I don't think it's good enough to use on its own for all situations in BO6 zombies. Coming up at number 9 is the Akimbo SOG. In the last video I made, this was the #1 gun, and it's dropped quite a lot, not only because it has been slightly nerfed in a recent balance patch, but also the visual recoil changes don't really make this gun feel any better. In fact, I don't know what it is, but this gun actually feels a lot worse than it did. With that in mind, it's still an exceptional weapon compared to the rest of the roster inside of BO6, but it's not the king that it once was. This became extremely noticeable once I started using it in the Citadelle AMR boss fight. You know, BO6, a lot of these encounters involve you needing to be at a range and hitting a very pinpoint location on an enemy, and the SOGs are just not built for that. Therefore, spraying hordes at literally 5 meters and trying to hit headshots on multiple zombies. That's exactly what it's cut out for, and if that's how you're playing or that's what you want to do, this is one of the best weapons. If you're going into boss fights, however, and need to be extremely precise and stuff like that, then maybe it's not the best option. On the flip side, it does have very good movement abilities, so just for mobility's sake, it might be worth using, but I can't really recommend this in the Citadel boss fight. I just think there's a lot better options out there. It's got one really specific use case, and that's mowing down zombies, and it does that very effectively, but I cannot say it's #1 anymore after the recent nerf. Coming up at number 8 is the PU21 LMG. Now, again, this has appeared on a previous list and is, in my opinion, still the only LMG worth using. There is the GPMG as an option, but that doesn't really quite match the same damage output that the PU21 gets, and they virtually have all of the same advantages and downsides, so there's no reason to pick the GPMG over the PU21, in my opinion. However, this is actually an exceptionally good boss fight weapon, and I mean that for anything. The End of Liberty Falls, Patient 13, or the Guardian on Citadelle AMR. Either way, it's a very good option because it can lay out consistent damage at a precise location, and because of its giant magazine capacity, if you can stay on target, then you can deal out a lot of damage without ever having to reload or reposition or anything. It's also good in co-op because if you can force the boss to target somebody else and you are just the damage dealer, then this is one of the better guns in the game. Obviously, low mobility does hurt this to some degree, and it's kind of situational, although, again, as far as LMGs go, it's not too bad, and this build is exactly how I had it before. Coming up at number 7, this is a weapon that's been buffed in a variety of ways. Its damage numbers were pumped up just a little bit, but also more importantly, and perhaps most importantly, the visual recoil has been significantly reduced, and this means that you can run this entire attachment setup, which definitely maximizes its damage potential and the ability to get scrap throughout the game, and you don't have to put on a red dot. You know, I preach optics for a lot of these weapons, but I actually don't think the KSV needs one, and that was the biggest issue, was the high recoil, because it does have higher than average critical damage, so if you're not taking advantage of that, then the KSV is not going to feel that good. But because the visual recoil has been reduced in a recent patch, this just feels a lot better to handle. You feel like it's the bullet hose that it should be, and it just dumps out damage. So a very good option here, and definitely takes advantage of both of these augments that we talked about for our prior perks. So the KSV really got a glow up, and it's not quite top 5 for me, but it's an excellent choice, and it has amazing mobility. Would highly recommend this build. Coming up next is the CRI C. This is a weapon that unfortunately got a little bit nerfed, but more importantly, its updates to visual recoil may have buffed it more than anything. Now, the CRI C is very similar to how it feels compared to the XM4. However, you will get better damage out of the CRI C if you are hitting criticals, which is why I do believe an optic is important for this weapon. I build these two rifles just about the same when it comes to their attachments, and maybe the only difference is choice of optic. You can go with something maybe a little bit higher magnification if you're playing a boss fight or something like that, but I do think having at least some kind of red dot is important because the iron sights are very ugly on the CRI, and you're going to be sacrificing a lot of critical damage if you don't have a really nice clean optic, in my opinion. So that's probably the most important thing I would run, and it does fire a lot slower than the XM4, but again, if you're hitting headshots, then you're going to be making for that up in critical damage. Coming up at number 5 is the SVD, obviously one of the most unique guns in the game, the shotgun sniper hybrid, and I've changed this build just a little bit. I honestly felt that having an extended mag 2 slowed down the aim down sight speed to where it felt a little bit too clunky. Now, I'm going to leave this up to you as personal preference. You can run the biggest magazine if that's what you value, but I do think it makes the handling, just tips it over the edge for me to feel a little bit too awkward. So I tend to think extended mag 1 is a good balance between like ammo capacity and being able to snappily aim down the sights. Either way, the other fantastic attribute about this weapon is it doesn't really punish you for body shots all that much. Obviously, because it's a shotgun, you can ADS and get that very precise pinpoint critical hit, or you can un-ADS and use the shotgun blast, and you're still going to be able to take advantage of the 2 augments that we discussed prior. So I think this is an amazing zombie gun. I think it can do just about everything. My only real complaint is, once again, that I think it feels and handles a little clunky, and it's not for everybody, I don't think. It just feels a little bit strange, but it is a very good weapon, and I think it's one of the higher skill weapons in the game as well. Coming in at the number 4 spot are the GS45 pistols, aka Mustang and Sally. Again, a consistently high tier weapon. Now, Treyarch did something very strange in a recent update where they kind of nerfed the gun. They basically made it so that extended mags didn't change the ammo capacity on the papped version, and then they reverted this change. I believe they broke rapid fire with that update too, so I actually ended up building this quite differently for a while, and I put a different grip on it instead to make its like jumping to fire speed a little bit better. But after they've reverted it, I went back to my original build, and this is what I recommend. Had you asked me like a week or two ago, whenever that update was, I may have given you my old build, which probably is not as good anymore. But again, it's a consistently great weapon in this game. However, I'm going to say it's not really the best in the Citadelle de Mort boss fight. I don't think it's actually a very good boss fight weapon in general. It's okay for Patient 13, but I do think there are far better options than this. I just think it's an all-around great gun. It's one of the easiest weapons to use as well, if you're using a Pack-a-Punch to Akimbo, of course, but a fantastic weapon that's never going to be bad. Speaking of bad weapons, I wanted so badly for the new shotgun, the Maelstrom, to make this list, but that's actually one of the worst weapons in the game, so don't use it at all. A lot of people have been telling me to try it out, but it's genuinely bottom tier. It's horrible. Do not use this shotgun. Coming up at number 3, however, we have a brand new gun in Black Ops 6 Zombies. This is none other than the AMR Mod 4, aka the Barrett 50 cal. Now, this was just a very mediocre sniper rifle back in Black Ops 2 Zombies. However, in BO6, it's truly one of the best guns in the game, and I've only been using it very recently as it's just come out, but I actually think it might be top 1 eventually. However, it is a top 3 gun, no doubt. The great thing about this is it feels like it has the damage potential of the Frostline without having to rechamber it, and it doesn't really punish you as much for missing headshots. The biggest downside when you get this weapon is that the magazine capacity isn't great. You're going to be burning through your ammo very quickly, but you can get an extended mag attachment, you can get rapid fire, and with the CHF barrel and these attachments in particular to control the recoil that you're going to be pressing, you know, very rapidly, because it is a fast firing weapon. This gun blew me away, man. I actually couldn't believe how good it is, and the attachments make it consistently deal out damage to very precise points, making it an amazing boss fight weapon. But not only that, it can deal with regular hordes too just fine. I often don't recommend the Frostline for just hoarding zombies and, you know, just general gameplay sometimes, but I can't really say the same applies for the AMR Mod 4. It does fine there, and it does great in boss fights, and it's a little bit more of a higher skill weapon, of course, because you need to be pretty accurate. I recommend putting on some kind of higher magnification scope, not exactly a red dot, but not a really super high sniper scope as well. Just somewhere in the middle. I think that this is the best balance for it. And this gun will do anything. It blows up hordes, it destroys bosses, it does it all. Like, it violates elite enemies. I love this gun. And again, check back a little bit later. This might be my top 1 weapon right now, but it's certainly worth using. I would go out of your way to get this one. But coming in at the number 2 spot is the Siren 9mm. This is a special weapon. It's basically an FMG, and we've talked about it before. However, I've only changed one attachment on here, and that's the grip. I went with the first one you unlock instead, the vertical foregrip, and you can also either have iron sights on it, or there is this like extended red dot, and it's okay, but it's really just personal preference. I don't think it makes that much of a difference. The only unfortunate thing with the Siren 9mm is that it doesn't have a whole lot of attachment customization. I wish it had more. I could probably make this gun even better, but still on its own, it does amazing, and it has some of the best damage numbers ever. It's low recoil, high damage, high mobility, very easy to use, and just one of the best guns in the game overall, because you don't need to invest a lot to unlock the best attachments for it. Just great right out of the box. Now, before we get to our number 1 spot, I'm going to give an honorable mention to the Sigma launcher, and the only only reason I'm putting it up here is because there in Citadelle More are these points of power traps that essentially act like Ring of Fire, giving you extended damage and infinite ammo. And this makes the launchers actually really good. Now, outside of this power point trap, these launchers aren't really worth using because you're not able to really deal critical shots to anything, so it's not really something that's viable. But inside of these very specific scenarios in these traps, these launchers are pretty good, and I think the Sigma is probably the best one. But now, finally, getting to our number one spot is weirdly a gun that I used to kind of hate. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the AS Val. I think this is actually now the best overall weapon in the game as far as ease of use and what it's really capable of. It has the highest DPS out of any of the assault rifles and some of the highest DPS in the whole game, period. And the big thing that has made this better is obviously some recent buffs, but most importantly, the visual recoil adjustments make this weapon a lot easier to handle because it does have higher than average recoil, and it does hard punish you for body shots. In fact, it's one of the worst guns if you are hitting armor or just hitting the body. You need to be hitting criticals to unlock its full potential, but this makes it a very good boss fight weapon. This makes it great against regular hordes of enemies, and if you can control the recoil specifically, then you will just absolutely melt away health bars. Bosses, elites, special enemies, regular zombies, whatever it is, will just die in front of you. It's gone from one of the worst weapons in the game, in my opinion, to maybe arguably the best. Now, again, it's not as situational as something like the AMR or the Barrett. Those I feel like do better in very specific scenarios. This is the overall all-around best weapon in the game. I think it competes with those, but it does everything. It's good for any circumstance, any scenario, any map. If you're just looking for a good, solid, well-rounded weapon, but still would like something with higher than average DPS, then I think the AS Val is the best choice here. It is a little harder to use, admittedly, than something like the XM4 or the Krig, just because it still does have higher than average recoil despite all of the changes, but it's definitely usable once you get a handle on it, and I think this attachment setup kind of suits it best, and it's a really good weapon in Black Ops 6 Zombies, period. So anyways, hope you guys did enjoy this. Let me know if I missed anything that you feel like should be on this list down below, but don't forget to subscribe before you go. Happy holidays, guys, and I will see you all in the next one. Peace out.